Welcome to this explainer. Look, teaching economics to dumb kids, it's a phrase that makes a lot of early childhood educators instantly break out in a cold sweat. But don't worry, we're going to completely demystify this today. It is absolutely not about complex financial systems. It's really just about play-based concepts, exploring community roles, and figuring out how we share our resources. I mean, it's a totally fair question, right? How exactly do you teach economics to a 3-year-old? When we hear the word economics, our brains usually jump straight to Wall Street, stock markets, and balancing these massive, complex budgets. The very idea of bringing that into a classroom full of toddlers feels completely absurd. It naturally causes a ton of anxiety for educators who wonder if they're somehow expected to teach 3-year-olds how to calculate interest or trade currency. Well, unless we're talking about trading, I don't know, 3 goldfish crackers for naptime immunity, that is absolutely not what we're doing here. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Redefining early childhood economics. 2. Tracking economic development milestones. 3. Economics across learning centers. 4. Blueprinting a play business. And 5. Literacy, equity, and inclusion. Let's dive right in. All right, Section 1. Redefining early childhood economics. There is this massive traditional financial myth out there. The incorrect assumption that economics in early childhood means calculating money or running these abstract currency drills. Honestly, those things just cause frustration because they completely lack age-appropriate meaning for young kids. The reality is what we call the SS2A choices approach. Early economics is simply the study of choices. It's about handling scarcity. Like figuring out who gets the absolute last red block in the bin. It's about dividing up goods and services and recognizing how community helpers sustain our neighborhoods. It is grounded entirely in everyday, play-based socio-emotional practice. Moving on to Section 2, Tracking Economic Development Milestones. It is truly amazing to see how naturally this scaffolds as kids grow. For infants, so 0 to 12 months, the core economic indicator is simply expressing raw physical needs and tracking cause and effect. Your applied practice here is responsive affirmation. You're just saying, oh, you're hungry, here is your warm bottle, narrating that resource distribution. By toddlerhood, around 12 to 36 months, they really begin to declare strong personal wants, and boy, do they experience scarcity. This is where you use visual choice boards to empower their decisions during those tricky transitions. Finally, for our preschoolers, the 3 to 5-year-olds, the focus shifts to distinguishing basic survival needs from non-essential wants. And this is exactly where we bring in the active goods and services business role play. Okay, Section 3, Economics Across Learning Centers. Now, you might be wondering if you have to overhaul your whole room for this. You absolutely do not need a massive new setup. In the library, you just read stories about community helpers, family responsibilities, and making choices. Over in the Math or Discovery Center, kids can practice foundational skills by sorting coins or grouping items by cost. In the Arts Center, they actually become producers. They're creating the signs and designing the menus they'll use in their pretend stores. And in the Block Center, they are physically building the economic infrastructure of their little world, the stores, restaurants, and banks where people work and trade. The whole shebang works together to build a community economy. Which brings us to Section 4, Blueprinting a Play Business. Imagine transforming a standard dramatic play center into a thriving local pizzeria. It grounds all those theoretical state standards in absolute joyful reality. Children are actively engaged in play-based transactions, passing around visual menus and using play tokens. But they aren't just playing, they are actively navigating supply and demand. They're learning why people work and figuring out the actual purpose of transaction tools. Let's break this blueprint down a bit. You basically divide the play space into 3 distinct roles. First, you have the producers. These are your pizza makers rolling out felt dough and carefully arranging cardboard toppings. Then you have the service providers, your delivery team boxing things up and mapping out a route to transport goods across the room. And finally, the consumers, the buyers ordering off a visual menu using pretend currency. This instantly shifts economics from some boring abstract worksheet into a highly physical, incredibly fun exploration of trade, cooperation, and, well, what happens when you literally run out of pepperoni. Finally, Section 5, Literacy, Equity, and Inclusion. Storytelling is literally one of the most powerful tools we have. By partnering with a narrative mascot, like Alabama's literacy initiative using Short the Squirrel, you can introduce these foundational concepts of choices and trade-offs in a highly engaging way. A great idea is, right after reading a story about choices, try drawing a visual decision tree anchor chart with your preschoolers. have the kids physically categorize pictorial cutouts into basic survival needs like milk, a winter coat, or a safe home, versus non-essential wants like, say, a toy castle or ice cream. It makes the super abstract concept of choice incredibly concrete for them. Now, as you audit your environment and set up all these amazing activities, there is an absolutely crucial equity check you must perform. Our early economic materials have to avoid classist stereotypes. You must ensure your classroom protects socioeconomic diversity and actively validates families from all economic levels. When children talk about the jobs their families do, or when they interact with community helper props, the environment has to value the dignity of all work. We want to frame transaction tokens as community tools used to purchase essentials rather than symbols of individual status. Agreed. Because ultimately, early childhood economics is definitely not about greed. It is about community care, responsible decision-making, and sustaining us all. Teaching this to a 3-year-old is really just about fostering empathy. It's about learning to share scarce resources fairly, understanding the vital roles our community helpers play every single day, and recognizing how our individual choices connect to sustain everyone around us. So you have the blueprint, you know the developmental milestones, and you have the equity lenses. Now I want you to look at your learning centers with fresh eyes. How will you set up your classroom to empower the next generation of careful decision makers today? Thanks for joining this explainer. Now get out there and let them trade those felt pizzas.